Hello, welcome to Reel Film Snobs. I'm Angela Yeager. I'm pleased to have with me once again I was going to say in the studio. We're not in a studio. I don't know. I said that for like 20 years, so I'm used to saying in the studio. I'm pleased to have with me on the show Autumn Edwards. Welcome to the show, Autumn.
Hello, we're in the virtual studio,
Yes, the
Angela.
virtual studio. And the virtual studio, we are reviewing today our top five movies from 2024. We always wait a little here on Real Film Snobs to put out our top of the year because we have to wait for the things that filter to Oregon or specifically to Salem that are from last year. So I felt like we both had plenty of films. If you watched our previous episode, I mentioned I had 24 four-star movies. So I thought 2024 was 24 films for 2024. I thought it was a pretty good year for films, but these are our top five films, and Autumn and I are going to count them down. And because I want to spend the time on the films and not yammering, I'm just going to get right into it with my number five film, which is Hard Truths by Mike Leigh. Mike Leigh has long been one of my favorite filmmakers of all time, and I would say he's one of our greatest living filmmakers still. He has never made a bad movie. I can't, and he's made 27, so that's a pretty good track record. His newest one stars Marianne Jean-Baptiste as a kind of depressed is one word to put it, a depressed and very angry woman, and her relationship with her sister, her very quiet husband and son who live in the flat with her in London. It's a character piece, like a lot of Mike Leigh's movies, about regular working people and some of their troubles. That's what Mike Leigh's films are often about. There's no spaceships or aliens or flying saucers or anything going to happen like that in a Mike Leigh film. Although if it did, that would be very interesting. And one of the things I loved about this film, of course, is the performances. Marianne Jean-Baptiste, who was previously in his fantastic masterpiece film, Secrets and Lies, comes back here, very different character. Is her character sometimes hard to watch because she's so negative and so down on everything? Yes. Do we all know someone like this to a certain degree? Yes. Do we all know someone like her sister who, despite being the sister of this very angry person, constantly tries to buoy her up and see the bright side? Yes. And that's one of the things I love about his films. The characters are so rooted in reality. The depressed son, adult son who sits in his room all day avoiding his mother as much as possible. The father that has gotten used to saying nothing and just trudges through life. All of these are grounded in reality, and that's partially because of Mike Leigh's way of making movies where he doesn't write a script. He has an outline of an idea, and then he rehearses for months on end with the actors, and they develop the characters with him, which is one of the reasons this film seems so authentic. You know, Mike Leigh is a 80-something-year-old white Englishman. He does not necessarily know anything about the lives of Black women in London, but he lets the actresses guide that part of it, and that's why it feels authentic and true. The sister works in a hair salon, and she has some amazing scenes. I almost wanted just a movie set in this hair salon in this movie because all the women in there get some great laughs. It's also very funny at times, which I may have forgotten to say. I laughed out loud a lot, and I also had tears in my eyes during certain parts. It's absolutely a phenomenal movie.
Yeah, I wish I would have had the chance to see this. I'm definitely going to be catching up on it soon. I know that Mike Leigh's like one of our great modern dramatists. In some ways, like I don't know. I do really appreciate from what I have seen of him, like you said, the way it's rooted in reality. A lot of his films and the way that he explores different social dynamics, from class to race to gender, like nothing is, off the table, and he's interested in all of it because he's just kind of interested in humans. And I think he's one of the few directors that is able to like elevate, what would on the surface be maybe a stereotypically boring, premise for a film and just make it wonderful and enrapturing just by virtue of his masterful direction. Like
Yeah.
he's a great dramatist.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Okay.
my number five, very different register from that, is Cloud, directed by Kiyoshi
Ah,
Kurosawa.
you decided
And
to put it in.
I
Okay.
decided to put it in. Yeah, I really enjoyed Cloud. So, long story short, Cloud is a psychological thriller about a man who resells goods online. And so, speaking of, premises that could be on their face boring, but in reality are not, this is one of those. Kiyoshi Kurosawa is one of the greatest, living directors, in my opinion. He's a fantastic horror director, because he doesn't really work in the traditional spaces of horror where a lot of people will resort to like cheap jump scares or what have you to get the audience, and it's all like slashers or whatever. Kiyoshi Kurosawa is a very psychological director, and that's where he excels. He does a great job of like placing the audience in the shoes of the protagonist and making them feel, all the discomforts, and really like I think most of his films excel because they just unnerve you to such a degree.
Hmm.
They're ones that like keep you up at night, not because you're like, ooh, what if somebody jumps out of my closet or what have you, but just because you're like, wow, the world is awful. Like this could happen in real life almost, or it's just like, kind of a hyperbole of things that already do happen in real life, but it feels very grounded in that regard. And
Hmm.
so, like with this, with the reseller of goods online, this guy is just kind of a societal leech. He's buying all these goods that people are excited for. It brings them joy and everything, but he's not interested in that at all. All he does is drive the price up, make his money, and get out. And it's super fascinating to see when that eventually starts coming back to him. He's accruing a lot of bad karma in this way,
Hmm.
and the way that Kiyoshi Kurosawa ratchets up the paranoia, I think it's just fantastic. It's a really well shot movie. I think the performances are uniformly great. And there's a sequence at the end. I think the last third of the movie is just phenomenal when they're in the factory and there is a shootout, but it's not like, most Western style shootouts that
No.
you see. It's super, super well directed. It's a lot of fun, very unnerving. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I love this film too, but I also gave it 4 stars. It didn't make my top 10 list. I debated about putting it in, and then we also talked about, and here's the part for our audience, Cloud is technically it is a 2024 film. It was released in Japan in 2024 and showed at some film festivals in 2024. But it isn't. It's getting a wider U.S. Release this summer in this summer of 2025. So I debated and decided to wait until 2025 if I don't have 10 films I love more than it, I suppose. But I can also see why you wanted to review it now because maybe this will get people excited to see it when it comes out this summer. It is a great film. I have to mention, since you mentioned he is known for directing a lot of horror films like Cure and Pulse. This film is much more of an action thriller, I would say, than a horror film. Although a lot of things that are horrific happen in it, it's not a horror movie even compared to Cure in terms of there being a lot of times these films there's sort of like a spiritual or otherworldly aspect that come in those films. This is very much of this world of like things that are happening now in the online sphere, which sometimes do feel otherworldly. And so I liked that about it. And I thought the action sequences were really well shot, as you mentioned. So, yes,
Mhm.
a terrific film for
Yeah.
sure.
I appreciate the way like it removes the anonymity and the perceived safety that's offered by the internet. And it makes you realize, oh yeah, especially nowadays when it's easy enough to find all sorts of information online, there is no real escape. There is not as much of a difference between online and reality as you might think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Okay, so we'll move on to my number 4 film, which is Between the Temples by Nathan Silver. This film I saw at Sundance in January of 2024, and it did get released, very small release. It did show locally here in Salem, and it's been online for a while, so it's easily available on streaming. This is directed by Nathan Silver, a director I was not familiar with. It stars Jason Schwartzman, another person that was in like a bazillion movies last year, and Carol Kane in, to me, what should have been an Oscar-nominated performance. He plays Ben Gottlieb, a cantor at the local synagogue, and he is having a crisis of faith and crisis in general. He's depressed, he's suicidal, he lost his wife, and he gets in a bar fight one day and he meets his old music teacher from elementary school, played by Carol Kane, who's one of my favorite character actresses and here gets a lead role. And she says, hey, I because of my parents being old hippies, I never got to have my bar mitzvah. I want to have my bat mitzvah now, even though I'm in my 60s, and I want you to teach me. And they become close friends. I would call this kind of a little bit of a Harold and Maudish feel to this movie, but I like this movie better actually. But they develop a relationship, a friendship, a love, if you will, and no one around them can understand it. It's a cringe comedy for sure. There's some scenes in this movie that are painfully cringy. So if you like the comedy of Larry David minus the sexism, this might be a good movie for you because it's not sexist at all. The female characters are very well portrayed. In fact, even the mother, so Ben Gottlieb's character, he has two mothers, Mira and Judith is played by the great Dolly Leon, who stole the show in the movie Triangle of Sadness. And the two mothers are just fantastic because they're exactly the opposite. One babies him and one constantly scolds him, and there's just so much comedy in this movie. I laughed my butt off, and that is rare in movies these days. And for that, I'm putting it at number 4.
Excellent. Another one to add to my list because I haven't gotten around to that one either.
I
But
know.
I'm going to give you one that I don't think you've gotten around to yet for my number 4, which is Baby Assassins and Nice
I knew it
Days,
was coming. I
directed
knew it was
by
coming.
Yugo Sakamoto. I know you don't love this series, but I gotta say, this third entry in the Baby Assassin series is definitely the best yet. The Baby Assassin series, for those that are unfamiliar, is a lighthearted action comedy franchise from Japan that features two young girls who are basically slacker assassins. This entry follows them, Mahiro and Chisato, to the city of Miyazaki where they're hoping to have a nice vacation, but it is, of course, ruined by another job that they have to do. The job doesn't go according to plan, however, when a freelance assassin named Fuyumura shows up and kills their target before they're able to, and this sets them on a collision course with their deadliest challenge yet. I adore these movies. I know they're not necessarily your bag, Angela, but I think they're just super fun, lighthearted. Like they make me feel happy. They're very funny. I think the two girls have like a wonderful rapport. And I have to say, the ending of this one, like I actually teared up. I cried a little bit, which I did not expect from a Baby Assassins movie because they're generally just lighthearted, good fun. And I have to say, the action too is phenomenal throughout all three of them. Like I think that's maybe one point that you will agree with, even if you don't care
Oh,
for it.
when it happens, when they stop talking, yes.
The
Yeah,
action is very, very good. So I really enjoy that. I enjoy that they're like two young girls, kicking ass out there. But yeah, this one really brings a lot of like character depth and like, highlights their relationship as like, it's this very deep, felt friendship. And I really appreciated that. Like I got emotional at the end.
oh,
So
well.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't I haven't seen this one, so I can't speak to it. I haven't loved the other Baby Assassins films. I was planning to watch them. In fact, I almost thought about trying to squeeze it in last night so I could surprise you with like, "Ha, I did see it." But I didn't. I watched an old movie instead. I watched an old Italian film. That's what I was in the mood for. There are things I like about the series. I do think the two lead actresses are great. I think my husband pinpointed it without ever having seen the series when I described it to him. He's like, "Oh, you're just too Virgo for that. You need a third character who's the one that's telling them, get your act together. Stop just eating food and go out there and get your crap together." So yeah, maybe that's the problem for me. Like I need more of an odd couple dynamic. Like they're almost too similar, which is an
I think they're
interesting
well
thing.
portrayed Gen Z girls. You know what I mean? They're definitely like airheaded young. They're just there kind of trying to have a good time. They just happen to have this job where they kill people, you know.
Yeah, maybe that's it. So, okay, we'll move on to my number 3 film, which is Chimera by Alice Rohrwacher. I even practiced saying Chimera and I still messed it up. By Alice Rohrwacher. Again, one of my probably favorite modern filmmakers. I've seen all of her feature films, and there's not that many. This one stars Josh O'Connor, another person who had a big 20 year in 2024 with also doing the movie Challengers, as a British looter who gets involved in an international network of stolen Etruscan artifacts set during the 1980s. And this movie is not for everyone. I will just put that out there. In fact, I'd probably say that about my top 3 films. They are not for everyone. You're either on Alice Rohrwacher's wavelength or you're not with her films. She is really into magic realism, which she puts into her films, and that's not everyone's bag. It is my bag. With humor, with darkness and tragedy, with romance. She has done this in many of her films. Happy as Lazaro and The Wonders are two of my favorite films of hers, where she brings in elements of magic into everyday life. And here, where you have people dealing with stolen goods. So the film is very funny in parts. It also, she uses a lot of non professional actors at times. The locals from this village in Italy are in the movie. She uses music in unexpected ways, which I love. Her films are beautifully shot. This is the first film of hers that's centered on a male character, which is very interesting because all of her characters in previous movies have been very female centric. So, but Josh O'Connor is actually really, really good in this. And I know he's getting a lot of buzz right now. He may or may not be Bond. I think it's well deserved. I actually think he's a really great actor. I thought he was the best thing in Challengers, and he is actually really good here, working with an exclusively Italian cast, with the exception of the wonderful Isabella Rossellini, who is absolutely fantastic in this.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this one. It made me want to watch more of her films. I agree
I'll
with
watch them
you.
with you. I love them.
Perfect. Yeah, I totally agree with you that it's just like phenomenal on all fronts. I think the performances are absolutely wonderful. Like you said, Josh O'Connor is really, really great. I love the magical realism elements of this, and I think it's beautifully shot too. I think that's something that I just have to mention. It is gorgeous to look at. Like she'll just have shots of just like light passing through a train or something, and it's
Hmm.
just like the most beautiful thing you've ever seen.
Yeah,
And I really appreciated the pacing of it. I thought it was like wonderful in the way that like, it takes its time when it needs to and it gets a little, faster when it needs to. I think she does a wonderful job of just crafting a completely unique world for this to take place in. Even though it is the real world, it feels kind of removed
that's
in a
what she
good
does
way
in a
from
lot of her
everything
films. Yeah.
else. Yeah.
She totally shoots on location. All of her movies I've seen them on location, and she makes the everyday life feel magical, and I love that about her. I mean, of course, it's not difficult to make Italy look great, right? I get that. Like she's not shooting in a mine and wherever, you know what I mean. But still, it still like makes the trees and the ground and like you said, those shafts of light coming to the train. And her films, this one does take its time. It is over 2 hours, and I watched it with my husband, and he, thought it felt maybe its length more than I did. So, like you said, it's maybe not for everyone in terms of the length. I like that she built it up because the characters, you get time to explore these characters.
Yeah,
So,
and they are fascinating characters. Like you said, I really appreciated the number of them and the depth that they each had. Like it was
yeah.
great.
My favorite character in the movie is Italia, played by Carol Duarte, who's actually, ironically, she's supposed to represent, her name is Italia because she's supposed to represent Italy in a way in the movie, who's played by a Brazilian actress, Carol Duarte, who is absolutely phenomenal in this movie as the love interest, if you will, although she's way more than that. Her character has a lot of layers. She's a single mom. She's hiding her children in Isabella Rossellini's house. I mean, trying to even describe the plot of this movie is very difficult because there's a lot going on. So
Yeah.
anyway, I'm excited for your number three.
Yeah, so my number three is another Kiyoshi Kurosawa film. It's Chime.
Oh.
So Kiyoshi Kurosawa was going crazy in 2024. I don't know how he did it, but he did technically put out three films in
Hmm.
2024. The only one that didn't make my list for it was Serpent's Path, which is a remake of a previous film he did in the 90s, which is great, mind you. But I think that Chime and Cloud are the two standouts. But Chime, it might be harder for people to find because it's technically like an NFT film, which is how he produced it. It's how he got the money for it. So it's a little bit difficult to find, maybe, but you can. I have found it. I'm sure that you can too if you're persistent. But it's basically the story of a chef slash teacher named Matsuoka, whose life is disrupted by a chime that drives him mad. He's the only one that can hear it, and each time he does, it brings like a greater sense of dread. And he first encounters it through a student that claims to hear it before sliding a knife behind his own ear into his head, killing himself in front of Matsuoka and his other students. And from there, it seems to infect Matsuoka and others around him, driving them towards increasingly erratic behavior. So I just think that, like every Kiyoshi Kurosawa movie, it's beautifully shot. I think the performances are great. There's a wonderful sense of like ambient dread in there. And I think that, like, again, like it's just so Kurosawa because it's very much rooted in like real issues, despite like the fantastical nature of the chime and everything. It's really just an analog for, any number of things. Like Pulse is an analog for, the loneliness epidemic and everything, and the internet, changing the way that we interact with each other. Chime here is basically it's just something that, for per my interpretation, unleashed the people's like inner feelings. Like it just let them tap into what they were truly feeling, to unfortunately often deadly consequences. But we see as it infects a number of people, like it doesn't really seem to change who they are. It kind of just enhances or like, brings to the forefront who they are. So like all the little, microaggressions, over time they become macro. And I just think Kiyoshi Kurosawa is a wonderful, diagnoser of societal ills, basically. And this is
Yeah.
another great example of that.
Yeah, I liked this movie. It is, I should mention, it's a shorter film. And so the
Mhm.
thing, and it looked fantastic. And I thought the central performance by the main man is, whose name I didn't write down, is really good. My main issue with it is I felt when it ended, I was like, oh, that's it. I almost want, I mean, if he wants to remake it someday into a bigger length feature, I wouldn't mind because I felt like he could have added more. I felt like I wanted more to happen, I guess,
Yeah.
which maybe is a good thing. A movie should leave you wanting more, not being exhausted, going, thank God that's over, right? But I wanted more, I think, out of it. And
Yeah,
so,
I understand that, but the more I reflected on it too, I was like, I think you can very easily see where it would be going, and I think by this point he's made his point, and it's almost more dread-inducing by leaving that hanging thread.
mm,
So I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
yeah, obviously, number three, that's really high. That's higher than I thought you'd have that one. So, okay, well, we'll move on to my number two film, which is Evil Does Not Exist. By Hamaguchi, who's been on my top 10 list a few other times on this show in the past years. Another one of our great modern filmmakers. I debated whether this was a 2023 or a 2024 movie in this case, because technically it was released in 2023. You'll see that if you look on IMDb, but it was not released in the US in theaters until 2024. So I'm going with that release date because that's when I saw it. And this is using a cast of most non-professional actors. The film follows a single father who lives in a village that is being disrupted by a glamping real estate project where they want to set up, like, it's this gorgeous forested area. So of course people with money want to take it over and use it for money, and the consequences of this development will have to their environment and their lifestyle. It is a beautifully shot film. I mean, you and I watched this together, and I was just stunned by how gorgeous looking it is. It is, of course, an important film from a message standpoint, although it doesn't hit you over the head with that message of the environmental impacts of what we're doing to our environment in the name of capitalism and the economy. And then it brings in, to me, what almost seems like a folk aspect with
Mhm.
the father almost seems like this character who lives in the woods with his daughter, and they're the way that they're living off the land, and he almost seems like an otherworldly character in a way, and things that happen make you question, did that really happen, or did we imagine that happened, or are we supposed to interpret this different? So it's not cut and dry, let's just say that. And I liked that about it. It also had, in my opinion, one of the best musical scores of the year. And it was intentionally that, which is intentional because the movie originally was supposed to be a short music video, like a 30-minute. And then once he got filming, he was like, I think this could be a feature. And I'm glad he did that because there is more to say here and it works as a feature.
Yeah, I'm so glad you chose this one because Ryūsuke Hamaguchi is one of my favorite living directors. I think he does not have a single bad movie. Like everything he's done has been incredible, and I always look forward to something new. The only reason this didn't make my list was because I technically like took it as a 2023 movie, but I'm so glad you put it in there because I think it is easily one of the best films of the past few years, and I think it's being overlooked in a way that it shouldn't be right now. Like you said, it's gorgeous. The themes are entirely relevant and appropriate. I love the title "Evil Does Not Exist" because it's very compelling and it really like makes you think right when you're reflecting on the whole movie. I think that's a big part of that film. Like what really drove the title home for me is just like the nature aspects and how we're talking about capitalism and so many people believe that to be like a natural consequence of like the strong survive type thing. And I like the way that this doesn't cast direct judgment necessarily on anyone, but really it's just highly, highly compelling. The performances were great. I feel like that town hall section in it is one of the like most tense, like fascinating scenes
Oh,
I've seen in
great.
any movie of the past several
Yeah.
years. And it's literally just people
Talking,
talking, yeah,
which
about
he's
like
great
the
at doing.
impacts and
Yeah.
consequences. Yeah, it's phenomenal. I
Yeah.
highly, highly recommend it.
He's a director who it's, and it's interesting because that scene is the only really talky. It's not a very talky movie compared to his other ones. If you look at like Drive My Car, where the majority of the movie is talking, this one is a little bit more visual than some of his previous films, which tend to be fairly dialogue heavy. But that scene in the town hall is very talky, and it creates great drama and tension with just people in a town hall talking. Which,
Hmm.
town halls can be pretty chaotic and anger inducing, but these are like Japanese folks in a small village. So they're being very polite, but also very like pointed and
You can
stern. So
feel the anger seething.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, it's a great film. So you're number two.
So my number
I
two
knew
is
this was going
one
to
that,
happen. We're running out
yeah,
of time.
it's okay. We can go a little quicker with this one because my number two is one that we actually talked about in last episode, which is Nickel Boys, directed by
Oh,
RaMell Ross. So I don't know how much time we need to spend on it, but I definitely recommend checking out the last episode because it's a wonderful film. I highly recommend it. It was really difficult for me to like do my top 10 this year. Like I don't know that any of them is necessarily in their correct spot. I think they're all just like 10 wonderful films that you should check out. But Nickel Boys, I think it's a very special film. I think that it deserves its laurels, and you should watch the last episode to see us discuss it. So your
yep.
number two
My number one. We're on number
or
one.
number one? Oh, number
Number
one.
one, my number one film of the year, drum roll please, A Real Pain by Jesse Eisenberg. A buddy road comedy and drama directed and written by Jesse Eisenberg and starring Jesse Eisenberg. Co-stars Kieran Culkin in one of the best performances of the year. They are mismatched Jewish American cousins who go on a heritage tour in Poland to honor their late grandmother. And they're on the tour with a various cast of characters, including Will Sharp, Jennifer Grey, and others. One of the things this film does really great is point out, in some ways, like other films I've had on my top 10, the strains of family relationships, the strains of having people in your life with mental health issues, which many of the films I picked have that, Hard Truths being another one. And it's a comedy, and it made me laugh a lot, and it made me cry. And it has been a great many times since I've seen a comedy this well executed. That also came from a real place of truth because Jesse Eisenberg's family did escape the Holocaust in Poland, and so it's a very he films it on location there, goes to the actual locations where his own grandmother lived. But it's not it's not just a Holocaust movie. That sounded awful. It's not really a Holocaust movie as much as it is a movie that has that as the backdrop, but then also is looking at these kind of family trauma, family wounds, how different people react differently. Kieran Culkin's character is got ADHD and who knows what else going on. There's no diagnosis mentioned in the movie. He is someone who Jesse Eisenberg has a really hard time with, even though he loves him more than anything. And I think that plays to a lot of things that we can relate with in our modern life.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I definitely want to check that one out. So adding it to my list.
Okay.
My number one is The
Yes.
Seed of the Sacred Fig, directed by Mohammad Rasoulof, which
Oh,
we
wow.
just watched the other day. The Seed of the Sacred Fig is a political thriller that follows the story of a family in Iran, primarily set against the backdrop of the 2022 to 2023 protests that were violently suppressed by Iranian authorities. So long story short, the father Iman is appointed as an investigating judge, though we quickly find that this is a double-edged sword because it puts him under the microscope for the public, who have a lot of issues with the authorities right now as they're trying to maintain the theocracy there. But I just thought this movie was wonderful in its drama. I thought it depicted the family relationships really well, the relationship between citizens and the theocracy and the government there very well. And I really, really appreciated the way that it interweaved real life footage of the protests into the films. I thought that was very
Fantastic.
special. I think it's a very important film. It was filmed entirely in secret because it certainly would not have been allowed to be made by Iranian authorities. So I think it's a special one that definitely deserves to be checked out.
I agree. It's my number 11, just because I didn't get a chance to rewatch it. I just watched it yesterday, so that's where I stuck it. But 4 stars, totally agree with you, Autumn. Check out all our reviews online at reelfilmsnobs.com. We'll also list where you can see these movies on that website or subscribe to our YouTube channel and keep supporting independent cinema. Thank you very much. Have a great day and great movies.
Bye.